Welcome to the Wealth Marketing Podcast, where we explore the latest trends, challenges, and opportunities shaping the financial industry today. In each episode, we bring you insightful conversations with industry leaders sharing practical, actionable strategies to help advisors deepen relationships and meet growth goals. I hope you enjoy. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Wealth Management Marketing Podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be joined again by my friend, Brian Hughes, the president of Eton Advisors. Brian brings more than 30 years of experience in the wealth management and family office space. He has helped lead and grow some of the industry's premier multifamily offices, including Pitcairn and Threshold Group, and has advised firms serving the ultra-high net worth community through his consultancy, Hughes Growth Strategies. Brian is a respected thought leader, a frequent industry speaker, and an ambassador for elevating how advisors serve ultra-high net worth families. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's great to be here with you again.
It's great to have you. When this report came out, I thought to myself, there's only one person I want to talk to about the report, and it was you.
Well, so I'm flattered. There's lots of people to talk to about this very comprehensive report.
Well, we can just dive right in. There was a lot of takeaways, and the first thing I want to just put out there is that this is the 2026 JP Morgan Global Family Office report. And this gives us insight from 333 family offices from around the world. These families are quite large in scope and assets. And so a lot of advisors out there could probably say, well, this doesn't really have anything to do with me. I work with families. I don't work with family offices. I'm a multifamily office. This really isn't my area. But I disagree. And what we'll talk about is how can advisors extrapolate what's in this report to help them with their practices and connecting more deeply with ultra high net worth families. We've seen a lot of advisory firms shifting up to want to serve the ultra high net worth market more. And we've also seen the rise in what I'll call the completion strategy for multifamily offices to serve single family offices in different ways. And so I think there's a lot we can take away from this report.
Agree. There's a ton here. We could probably spend hours on it, but I'm sure we don't have hours. So I think focusing on what MFOs and independents, boutiques who serve families similar to them, or at least the service model for these families, these single family offices, I think there's a lot to take away. And I think we could be helpful in directing our peer firms on how to serve these families better, given this report.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what we've seen, in the past, let's call it 15, 20 years, in terms of what families were focused on and now what we see they're more focused on today?
Sure. Well, it just so happens my family office experience does span the last 20 something years. So I've certainly seen and experienced firsthand the evolution. First with Pitcairn, as you mentioned, a multifamily office privately owned based in Philadelphia, and starting to work with some of those families. And just the lack of understanding of what a multifamily office or even a single family office, what they are at the time. And this is 20 years ago. So I think they got a lot of attention. There were organizations like Family Office Exchange and the Family Wealth Alliance and others who shone a light on the service model for these families that need a comprehensive multi-generational services beyond investments, but fairly unknown, 20 years ago. But that's really changed, right? So what we've seen is just a plethora of firms coming out of the woodwork serving these families. So the number of multifamily offices, I don't know what the percentage growth is, but it's significant. To serve families that maybe aren't big enough to have a single family office, but have those needs, maybe $100 million, $200, $300, $400 million families. So I think the big shift has been focused on just investments 20 years ago to now all these other services that families really need as they think about wealth moving down from one generation to the next. And that complexity causes an enormous amount of needed expertise and experience working with families that have those issues. So we can dive a little bit deeper into that. I would say just the headline is a shift from investment only services to investments and non-investment services. And we can get into that a little bit.
I mean, I remember, 15 years ago, I remember the conversations around the softer side of wealth management, right? Which is funny in and of itself. But the families, that was really sort of a side add-on service that was really sort of hard to talk about, and families weren't that interested. But now what we're seeing from the results of the study is that these families actually are interested in succession and governance and family dynamics. I'd also love to talk about what you've seen over your decades of experience, and then how it correlates with what we find in this data on investments as it pertains to alternatives and private investments.
Yeah, so that was, I guess it wasn't surprising to me, but I think if you just look back even 5 years ago, I think the numbers are staggering. With families allocating a significantly larger portion of their portfolios to alternatives, primarily private investments, but also, real estate and hedge funds. It's becoming an increasing percentage of their investable wealth. We started to see that trend probably 8 or 9 years ago, but it continues to rise significantly. And I think part of that is driven by maybe some of the global instability. Inflation, was not just cited in the study, but it's something that, all of our clients are well aware of what's been going on in the last few years around concerns regarding inflation. What are the asset classes you turn to try to mitigate that? And the other piece of that is the fact that these are multi-generational portfolios. So these aren't 5-year portfolios. They're more like 30 or 50 or 100-year portfolios. So there's a larger appetite to take on more risk and illiquidity during that time. And again, I think those are factors that have driven the increase in alternatives, especially in privates.
Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of firms out there, maybe 10 years ago, we were seeing that alternatives were a big differentiator, private investments were a big differentiator, and now we're seeing that they really have become table stakes, and that they are a non-negotiable for an ultra high net worth family.
I think there was a quote in there that these have become less tactical and more strategic for families, and there's no doubt that that's the case with the families that I've seen and worked with over the years.
I also want to talk about the opportunity that we're seeing emerging for multifamily offices to serve single family offices. We know that it's incredibly complex and expensive to run a single family office. And even for some of the world's largest families, we are seeing a market opportunity open up for multifamily offices to serve these single family offices as a completion strategy. And that was something I think that was relatively unheard of 15 years ago, but I think now it's becoming much more common. I'm seeing it in my work with advisory firms, and I know you're seeing it as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that opportunity for multifamily offices.
So a couple things. First, there's no doubt that there is a trend because of the rising costs of running a family office, the increased cost of human capital, and the lack of talent that's out there that's driving single family offices to look outside of themselves for resources that can help them, as you say, complete maybe something that's already in place, whether it's to complete their investment team or to build out a certain area of investment expertise that they don't currently have. Again, that was cited in the report. Increased need for more expertise outside on private investments, but also the fact that these families, I think, are a little bit more open to the fact of that they could partner, and the privacy issue is still there. But I think given certain criteria, one, trustworthiness, credibility and expertise, values alignment, they can find the types of partners who can really serve them well in areas, not just in investments, but in other areas like family governance and education, succession planning, et cetera. And as a matter of fact, at Eton, we have existing client relationships where we serve as a completion strategy for single family offices. So it's something that is not new to us. It may be really to the industry, but I think it started probably 5 or 8 years ago. And there's a number of firms that are out there that we both know of that have actually built out a service model specifically tailored to single family offices. So I think we'll continue to see more of that.
I think so too. I'd love to hear, just from what you've seen, where are the holes that you see single family offices are looking to fill? Is it more on the investments? Is it more on the governance and structures? What are you seeing in terms of what those needs are?
Yeah, well, I think there are many areas, Rosemary, that single family offices find themselves in a position where they don't have the talent or the expertise or the resources that they need. And yes, on the investment side, there's no doubt that even public markets and private markets are an area that continues to challenge single family offices without the depth and the resource capabilities and the research capabilities, frankly, to be able to vet these opportunities for their portfolios. So I think that's one area that will continue to grow. And again, that includes public markets as well as private markets. On the non-investment services side, there's no doubt that single family offices run fairly lean. I think in the survey, the average size of a single family office was anywhere from 4 to 8 people or something like that from a staffing standpoint. So it wasn't huge. In the areas where wealth transfer is a big issue for families, so when you think about the topics like governance and succession planning and rising gen preparedness, which were all highlighted in the survey, those are areas where they need outside resources. And we're fortunate that there are so many wonderful firms, in North America that provide these services more as a specialty firm as opposed to a multifamily office. Now, there are multifamily offices that have this level of expertise and can provide some of those services. But I think at a minimum, single family offices are looking for a trusted partner to be able to source some of those resources and to source some of that expertise as well.
And there's other kinds of firms that are popping up, I think, too, like firms. And I think this might have been relatively unheard of maybe 15 years ago, but firms that do everything but investments, right? So firms that are able to offer all of those other things that families and maybe single family offices also need, do it without the investment mandate. I think that's also speaking to the importance and the focus on these services, because I think that probably 2 decades ago, that would not have been a viable business model.
I probably, when I was at Pitcairn, which was not quite 20 years ago, I couldn't name 5 firms that were specialty firms that weren't either insurance related, investment related, or family business consulting type firms. There are so many other disciplines out there that family offices need that expertise that have popped up as boutique specialty firms. And we could spend hours talking about the different types of firms that are out there now. But single family offices and multi-generational families all need these services at some point in their life cycle. And so it's really driven the growth of these specialty firms.
I totally agree. So I'd love to talk about the findings of the report. We touched a little bit on the investments and alternatives and private investments now being, table stakes. They are required by families if they're going to consider, an investment strategy. What do you see as the top, from your experience with families in your role at Eton, but also from the, as correlated by the data in the survey, what do you see as the biggest risk drivers that families are worried about?
That's a loaded question. We could go in many different areas, Rosemary, but I would say one of the biggest is this, significant transfer of wealth that's going to happen in the next 20 years or so. And that transfer of wealth is going to drive the needs of these single family offices to build services and expertise to support the next generation and preparing the next generation to receive that wealth. And that was one of the big takeaways from the survey, is this large percentage of single family offices who cited the unpreparedness of the rising generation. So that's a big factor. I think that another factor is, just to shift gears for a second, on the enterprise owning families. I don't remember specifically the number, but it was under 50%, but more than 40% of the single family offices surveyed still own operating businesses. And the number of those families who don't have a succession plan was staggering, where the leaders do not have a decision-making process for succession. And we've at Eton worked with a handful of families who really have raised their hand and expressed a need for dialogue between generations and being able to determine, is this next generation going to be able to take over the family business? Because frankly, things have changed. And I think the number of family-owned businesses that move from one generation to the next, those numbers continue to diminish. A lot of it is driven by mobility. A lot of it is driven by the desire of that next generation to actually be in a family business as opposed to go and exploring something else. Where it was more traditional for a son or daughter just going to step into the business and then take over. So we see a lot of that. And I've certainly experienced a lot of that throughout my career, where these multi-generational business owning families are very concerned about what's going to happen with the next generation and do they want to take over the business or not. And if not, then what?
It certainly is a heavy burden. And I've actually seen that also in my role. I hear, anecdotes from advisors who are really struggling to advise their clients. What happens when your children are not equal? What happens when, one is prepared to participate in the business and the other one is not? And how do you equalize your estate? And how do you make things, what happens when, when what seems fair is not equal and vice versa? So I can imagine that a firm who is able to step in and guide a family in that way would have a huge opportunity right now in particular. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that later in terms of tactical strategies to talk about that value proposition. But I'm curious to know, in your experience, how are anecdotally, we see in the survey, but anecdotally, are you finding families seeking out governance strategies?
Absolutely. I think it's a combination of families are becoming more educated about what's even out there. Families are attending family business conferences more often than they were even 5 or 10 years ago, because frankly, a lot of the top business schools in the U.S. have installed a family business or a family enterprise program or an entrepreneurship program in their schools. So families are having ready, easy access to these types of programs, and they put on a lot of conferences and gatherings and even workshops and webinars to educate these wealth owners and business owners. So I think there's greater exposure, and the fact that if you went to a business owning family 10 years ago and said, hey, would you like to work with a family business consultant? Is that something that you feel like you'd need? And you get kind of a quizzical look like, I don't even know what that is. But that's less likely to happen today because of the growth of not just the service firms who are in that business, but also the need that has arisen and the amount of exposure and education that these very smart business owners are getting now where they weren't in the past. I also think it's a driver of this might be that the next generation has actually taken over that business, and now they are getting in. So the G2 is now taking over, or has taken over that business in the last 20 years, and now they are more aware of the issues that they faced when they took over that business from mom or dad or a grandmother or grandfather when they started that business. So there's much more, I think, awareness of the challenges of transitioning that business to the next generation. So they're educating themselves.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your work and your experience at Eton specifically. You and I have talked a little bit about this, about the work that you're doing with families to prepare them and working with so many generations at once. I'd love to hear a little bit about, from your experience, what is that like when you're working with a family in that way and help them guide them through that process?
Well, thanks for asking that question. I'll just start by saying I don't think I've had this much fun in my career.
Oh, that's
I am
great.
really enjoying not just the team and the fact that I think we have a very unique and wonderful value proposition for families, but also to get to actually work with the families. And although I'm not in a role where I'm first chair and serving families directly, I've spent a considerable amount of time in the last 2 years getting to know our families and really just understanding what it is that they value about what we do and why they hired us, and what's in the future for them and what they're looking to us to be able to provide to them to serve not just them, but their next generation. So I think that the fun that I'm having is we will do family meetings for our clients every couple of years. So I was just recently at a family gathering a couple months ago, and we spent most of that time just educating the family on topics that they wanted to learn about. So we brought in an expert on cybersecurity and privacy protection, identity protection, and the reaction we got from the family was just, wow, there's so much here I did not know and did not understand, and understand now what I can do to mitigate some of these risks. They were certainly aware of it, but I think pulling back the curtain on some of those risks for families was very valuable to them. But that's just one area of the many topics that we covered over the couple days with the family. We also build in some social time and an opportunity for the family to tell their own stories, because these different households live in different parts of the country. So many times it's the first time that they've gathered entirely as a family in several months, but carving out that time to hear their own personal stories and reflecting on the year and what they're looking forward to. To me, that's the joy of what we do, is truly being able to serve these families, meeting them where they are, but uncovering and discovering what's important to them and what their money or their wealth means to them and to their future, and how we can best position them to achieve their goals long term. So it's just a lot of fun. We have wonderful clients. They're just, they're regular people, just like you and me, but, they just have more complexity when it comes to being able to manage and navigate not just their own wealth, but the wealth as it moves down generations. As I said, I'm just really, truly enjoying myself and being able to collaborate with my business colleagues and partners to be able to serve these wonderful families.
It's amazing. I don't know how many people can say that about what they're doing for their profession. I hope many of them, but
I am blessed.
I'm guessing probably not. And so what a gift to be able to talk to them about the things that they're worried about. And I think that's one of the keys that I want to mention here, and we'll get into when we talk a little bit more tactical, but taking that conversation and shifting it from what we used to traditionally talk about in these meetings, which was probably investment portfolios and the investment results and how you've been doing with your performance, and shifting it into what they are focused on, which has changed, right? It's changed dramatically over the past decade, certainly. So into more, the succession, the security, the strategies for decision making.
Yeah, I would love to dig into, some of these other topics that, as you said, families are more concerned about today than they were even 5 years ago. There's so much has happened from not just a global perspective, but even a local perspective from these families as their children are getting older and what they're exposed to and the risks that they're taking on even when they travel. I think there's more and more things to be concerned about, but having a partner that's actually looking around corners for you and being able to identify what those risks are, to help you understand what those risks are in simple, straightforward terms, and then to have strategies to mitigate those risks. So that's another fun part about what we get to do, is not just to educate, but be able to, as I said, look around corners, look into the future, and be able to help them understand and plan for some of those risks.
Okay, so we have here in this data, families are worried about geopolitics. They're worried about succession planning. They're worried about governance, dynamics, their children, preparing their heirs. They're worried about family cohesion. Operating businesses continue to be a key theme. Why do you think the majority of content out there for multifamily offices focuses on technical investment stuff?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question. I mean,
when families are so focused on these other themes.
Yeah. I do think that part of it is that many of these firms evolved or came out of investment firms, and that frankly has been their expertise, and they're trying to expand in other areas because their clients are telling them, hey, listen, investments are kind of table stakes. We understand that you do a good job managing our money, but these are the other issues that we're concerned about. And then the advisors or the firms start to, panic is the right word, but figure out, okay, how are we going to be able to serve these families in these other areas? And unfortunately, many of them don't have that expertise or don't even have the resources or the networks to be able to tap into those types of specialty firms who can serve them well. You don't have to have the specialty service internally to be able to be a resource and to be what I would call an air traffic controller for your client, where you're making sure that advisors are working well together and they're not running into each other. So, but I think that many of these firms came out of brokerage shops or different investment firms and evolved in being able to kind of put the spotlight on their investment processes, when today these families need much more. And so I do think that the firms that are really built to serve the whole family in a holistic way, to be able to provide an integrated approach, are going to be the firms that win now and into the future. And those firms have already figured out, like Eton, that it's more than just managing the money. And that's a cornerstone and certainly a pillar of what we do, and using a goals-based investment approach, which our CIO was a pioneer of over 25 years ago at US Trust. But to be able to address those other softer issues, if you will, that families actually that keep them up at night. Those are the issues that keep them up at night. I'm not saying that investments don't, but certainly these other issues about how am I going to prepare my kids?
Right.
How am I going to tell my kids? How am I going to communicate? to my children? How am I going to educate them on the structures that we've set up?
Yeah, exactly. It's not that investments aren't important. It's just that it's become a much more complex scenario, right? They are important. So this presents an opportunity, right? As I see it, I see a gaping hole, and I see an opportunity for firms who are able to communicate about the things that clients are truly interested in and worried about. If we're able to take this data from the family office report and extrapolate from that ultra high net worth families are feeling the same pressures, they're feeling the same worries as these family offices, we can start to see, okay, so what are the things that where's the opportunity for the multifamily office to deepen relationships, to communicate about things where that families are going to connect with on a deep level. And so how can firms evolve with their growth strategies to be reflective of these new insights?
You know, if I could, Rosemary, just cite the work of the Ultra High Net Worth Institute.
You
Um,
can.
okay. I am a faculty member. I'm on the advisory board. I've been involved since pretty much the beginning. And just to see not just the traction, but the amount of high quality content and thought leadership that the Institute has put out in the last few years. But one of the pillars of the Institute has been the development of the 10 domains, which I won't go into in detail, but you could look at it on the Ultra High Net Worth website. But the 10 domains really do cover, one, the relationship between the advisor and the family, the wealth owner or the ultra high net worth family. And then the other 9 areas are really areas that these multi-generational complex families have identified as they need at some point in their life cycle some area of expertise. So in addition to estate planning and tax planning and investment planning, areas like philanthropy and governance and rising gen education and health and wellness, these are all areas that you wouldn't have thought of 15 years ago, certainly. But they have come to the fore because families are more concerned about these other issues. And people are, living longer, although that's not the case in the US right now. But people are generally living longer and people are more focused on their health. I just throw that out as one area. There's a number of firms that have come up in quality firms that actually focus specifically on concierge medicine or healthcare or wellness. And that's an area that a firm like an Eton Advisors, we're a boutique firm. We're not a huge firm, but we have access to those resources in those firms and to bring that expertise to bear for our clients. So I think one area for firms that are in this space that want to serve that market, they need to identify what are all the different disciplines that need to be delivered to these families over a life cycle. Not all at once, but certainly over a period of time where a family decides, it makes sense for us from both a strategic standpoint, but also from a tax standpoint to create a family foundation. Great. What resources are needed to make sure that we're giving our money away in a way that is actually both productive, that gets results, and that really aligns with our mission? We'll go hire a philanthropic advisory firm to help you do that, or hire a firm to be able to actually process and administer the foundations, just as an example. So there are firms like that. We do a lot of that work internally, but we also partner with outside firms to provide some of the expertise that we don't have. I think the 10 domains is a great blueprint, if you will, for firms that are looking to understand what are those other services that we need to be aware of that our clients may not have shared with us they have a need, but maybe there's a need that's unspoken. And we also another piece of this, I think, Rosemary, is I think we also need to be experts in the art of discovery. It's as much as an art as it is a science to be able to have these conversations with clients and ask really good questions and start to uncover those areas that maybe have not come up in a investment review meeting, right? So I think expanding our ability to be able to ask great questions of these families will help us figure out what services are really needed. And then we have to, as a firm, decide, are we going to insource that as a core service, or is that an adjacent service where we want to partner with an outside firm or firm?
And we're seeing, that this is becoming very prevalent. This is a big conversation with firms, right? They're sort of looking around themselves and saying, what else do we need to add? How are we going to do this? How are we going to fulfill these needs for these families? And I think that it's becoming more and more of an opportunity, right, to go into that, into those different areas. And the 10 domains, they are the perfect blueprint. And then tactically speaking, when we're thinking about marketing and we're thinking about communications and we're thinking about content, because, for me, everything goes back to content. there's so many things that a firm can do to talk about this value proposition that they have to be able to serve families in this way. So shifting from investment conversations into conversations about how they serve the rising generation and how they develop family governance strategies and why a decision-making framework is so important. I think that is where the connection will form with families, is when a firm is able to talk about all these things that they're doing for families, because it's not just the investments, it's not just taxes, it's so much more. I loved when you told me about some of the work that you're doing at Eton, in very real terms, these multi-generational family meetings that you're crafting, and they're so complex, and being able to talk about that is the perfect way, I think, to demonstrate the value proposition.
Well, thank you. I think when you look at the prototype family, call it the ideal family that is built for the service model that any firm has created, and I think about our own service model, they look to us to be, and I used this phrase earlier, but kind of the air traffic controller, where yes, we manage the day-to-day transactions and processing and investment, building the investment portfolios and implementing investment strategies. We do that day in, day out. But it's these other areas that we're engaged with our clients in, where I think both resonates more, adds more value, and can have a lasting impact. And I'll just go back to that family gathering that we had, the family meeting a couple months ago. We had 3 generations of family members there. So the third generation were some of them were in strollers, but that's okay. But they were there. And I think just having the ability to connect with those generations and being able to hear what's important to them and how they see the future and what this wealth, being a wealth owner, means to them, and just some of their areas of concern. So I do think having that better understanding of what your clients want and need by asking good questions and uncovering some areas that wouldn't come up in a meeting, I think is really critical.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think that's one of the critical mistakes I see so many firms making, right? Focusing on talking about things that their clients are not asking, right? They're not, the families are interested in other things. They're worried about other things. And I think it's so important to be, as you said, really attuned to a discovery process that's going to help you to uncover what your clients are actually worried about and what's keeping them up at night. Brian, I'd love to hear, from your decades of experience, what do you see as one of the biggest mistakes that multifamily offices are making when it comes to what they're putting out to the marketplace in terms of their value proposition? And how does that correlate with the findings of the survey?
So I think one of the things that does not surprise me anymore is that when you look at what firms are putting out there in general, and certainly there are exceptions to the rule, is they talk about the same things over and over. They use the same language, and sometimes it's industry jargon, which families don't understand. And it just is not a way to get the attention of these families, because it may not be what's on their minds and what they're really thinking about. So having a differentiation between this type of investment versus that type of investment, or differentiating yourselves by saying we have all these great resources or we have all these great people, it doesn't really matter to families. What really matters to them is, do you understand me? Do you understand my family? Do you understand the complexity that we have? Do you understand what's keeping me up at night? And I'd like to hear from you about how you're addressing those, but give me examples and tell me stories about where you've uncovered that issue or problem for a family and then you solved it. So I think the mistake is to talk at people. And to talk about services like their products, and to talk about expertise by demonstrating the number of credentialed people you have on your team. I mean, I think all those things are wonderful, but that's not what's going to get the attention of families who really need what these firms do. And there's many, many great firms out there who do great work for their clients, but I think they're sending the wrong message.
100%. It's a missed opportunity to connect with people. People don't care about what you care about. They care what they care about. They want to hear about their problems, their challenges, what's keeping them up at night. When you're able to put a pin into what they are worried about and uncover those issues, I think is a beautiful opportunity to deepen a relationship and really connect with someone. And they're going to remember that.
Yeah. And you have to connect on an emotional level. I think that there's an old saying that people don't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. And I think we can use language and tell stories that evoke that emotional connection with families about an issue that they're dealing with. I think once you're able to do that through storytelling, which I think is incredibly important and powerful, then you're able to connect on a level that firms cannot. And you go beyond just the rhetoric and the industry jargon and the service speak, if you will, that will differentiate you and get the attention of these families who really do need what you have.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, thank you so much for talking with me today about this report. It is so interesting. And I do think there's so much data here. We could probably spend 2 or 3 days talking about it. But I'd love to give people, a way to get in touch with you if they want to. Can you please tell us how anyone who's looking to reach out would find you?
Sure. Well, we're easy to find on the web. Our website is etonadvisors.com. So that's pretty simple. And although we're based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, our clients are all around the country and in North America. You could always find me at my email at brian.hughes@etonadvisors.com. But I think in general, I'd love to be a resource to anyone who wants to reach out and just learn more about the discussion that we had today. Not just specifically about Eton Advisors, but certainly the broader landscape of what's going on in the ultra high net worth, multi-generational market, because I do think these families need our help and they need the help of many firms. And there's more than enough opportunity to go around to firms that can serve these families well. So just, taking your firm to the next level and understanding what these families really want and need is going to be a critical component of being successful in the next 5, 10, 20 years. And I think this report, actually, if you just splice it, it really is 2 reports. It's one on investments, and it's the second half of the report is on everything but investments. And I think it's the everything but investments that is the richer part of the report. And not to diminish what's going on in the investment world and where the focus is for these families, but really the concerns of these family offices and multi-generational families about what's going to happen to the next generation. I think that's one of the big opportunities there.
I think as an industry, as a whole, we've really come a long way. The conversation has really changed over the past 20 years.
It certainly has. And I can tell you that I can't tell you how many times people asked me what a family office was 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And now I have to explain that less often.
Well, that's a win. All right, Brian. Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Rosemary, thank you. This is a wonderful conversation. I look forward to our next one.
Same.
So, Rosemary, one of the things that we didn't talk about is this report obviously is very comprehensive. And I think if you just look at it, I think the question we ought to be asking is what can firms do with this report and how can they create some thought leadership of things they're already doing for families to be able to highlight the areas where families have their biggest concerns, whether it's on the investment side or on the non-investment side. I'd love to hear from you. What can firms be doing to put their thought leadership out and use this report as a catalyst to do so?
I'm glad you asked. For me, everything goes back to the content. So if we think backward from who is our target audience, right? These ultra high net worth families, they've got family members all over the world. They're worried about their legacy. They're worried about family governance. They're worried about preparing their heirs. So we have to think about, as a firm, what are we publishing to the marketplace? What are we talking about? How are we expressing our value proposition? If the majority of the content that we're putting out to the universe is about investments, if it's about the markets, if it's market commentary, then there's a huge gap there, right? Of what families are looking for and what we're talking about. So to your point earlier, we're talking at them about what we want to talk about instead of what they want to talk about. And so there's the opportunity. So if we think about what it is that they're asking, what are the questions they're asking us as advisors, they're asking about their succession plan. They're asking about their children and preparing them to be stewards of this wealth. They're asking about the geopolitical risk. They're asking about, maybe they're asking about AI, right? We saw that pop up in that report a lot.
Right. We didn't even get into that.
We didn't even get into AI. But this is what families are asking about. And so we should be thinking, okay, how can I create a content strategy that is totally focused on what these families are worried about? So there's things like podcasts and videos and webinars and white papers that instead of talking about, the markets, they shift into a conversation that's much more emotional, much deeper, a little richer. And it's talking about the things that your families, that these ultra high net worth families are focused on. So creating a content strategy that's very focused on that subject matter is really where the opportunity is for a firm to connect with families on an emotional level.
Couldn't agree more. And I think if you just asked one question to each of these 330 or so families, what matters most? I'd be shocked if more than 40% of them said investments.
I would bargain it would be a lot less.
Yeah, I would agree.
Perfect. All right, Brian, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rosemary.